Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our conference. This is our 7th and penultimate session. I'm Rachael Murphy, and I'm Director for Scotland with CoMo. I'm really excited to be sharing this session with you this afternoon, sponsored by our friends at Liftango, where we'll be talking about the concept that transport is not fair, sustainable mobility, and social equity. So I'm really excited to be leading the session and welcoming to the stage, the virtual stage, first of all, Waffiyyah, who's from Better Bike Share Partnership. What I would say as well, guys, is that we'll be taking questions after every panelist. So please do get your questions ready in the chat. And thank you so much, Waffiyyah. I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning here from Chicago, where I am currently. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Thank you for having me. My name is Waffiyyah Murray. I'm with the City of Philadelphia's Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability, where I manage our Better Bike Share Partnership work here. Next slide, please. So just briefly, Better Bike Share Partnership, for those who aren't familiar, is a national initiative focused on incorporated equity and access and shared use micromobility nationally. The partners include the City of Philadelphia, People for Bikes, and NECTO. Next slide, please. So the question at hand today is how far are we on our journey to making transport fair or equitable, as some may say. I would say, we've come a long way, but we still have a lot of work to do. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what equitable transportation should look like and what should be incorporated in that. Next slide, please. So for starters, we have to acknowledge, the history of transportation throughout the years. A lot of roads, railways, transit lines, a lot of infrastructure that is currently in place was built on, the structure of institutional racism and other structures that were built to segregate and divide people instead of bringing them together. Some of those structures still exist. Some have been redesigned, but it's important to acknowledge the history of transportation and understand why, even with the work that we've done, there's still more work to be done, and understand why a lot of folks are often, skeptical about, is this really for us? Next slide, please. So in order to, rebuild that trust and to build a better narrative, it's important to start that trust building. And the trust building should start before any project, any program, and anything is implemented. Start with really connecting with the community, the residents that you're working with, especially if you're working with communities of color or often underserved or marginalized communities. Start with building that trust, finding out, what their barriers are, what their interests are, and working together to create projects that are truly equitable and fair, and to be able to create projects that really meet the needs of everyone. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, really identifying the community needs. Like if you're putting up a bike lane or you're adding, a bike share program or a scooter share program, talk with the community to see, is this something that you really want? And if so, how does it fit into your everyday life and everyday schedule? You don't want to build programs or structures that support, just you yourself. You want to be able to build structures that support everyone, especially the community. And so making sure that you talk with the community, identify what their needs are, and see how the programs or the transportation programs that you're trying to implement really connect with the needs of those community members. Next slide, please. And it's important to also have representation. Have that representation, not just in your marketing, your advertising, but also in your team, also in the voices that are present there. You want everyone to be able to see themselves in your project, regardless of race, culture, shape, size, etc. You want to make sure that you have that representation. Next slide, please. And it should be a co-creation and co-development process. So we need engineers and we need planners to be able to implement projects, but we also need the community. And it's important to understand that those communities are the expert when it comes to this. So you want to have a co-creation, the co-development process where the planners, the developers are coming together with the community leaders to create a process to implement a equitable and fair transportation project. To create it, develop it, help implement it, and also to continue that work even when the project is done. Oftentimes you see people doing a lot of the outreach in the beginning of the project, and then once the bike lane is there or the new transportation option is there, you don't see that process or that co-creation or that joint process anymore. But it should continue even once your program is implemented. Continue to connect with community members, continue to support each other in that process. Next slide, please. And it's also important to understand that communities are powerful. As I mentioned earlier, when it comes to the community that they're living in, that community members are the experts, and community members are powerful. They don't need anyone to come in and tell them how they need to operate, how they need to organize themselves. They are organized. They know how to gather. They know how to support projects that are of interest to them. I think that's the key, making sure that you're not trying to put your own narrative or your own priorities on the community, but making sure that if you're building a process that's for them, that you take into account what their priorities are and how it can be most useful to them. So I understand that communities are powerful. They don't need anyone to come in and empower them. They just need some people to come in and work together with them and have a joint co-development process to be able to build systems together. Next slide, please. And last but not least, I just want to say, don't be afraid. So as I mentioned, we have a long way to go, but we have come far. And the only way to continue to grow and continue to really have a fair and equitable transportation system throughout the world is to not be afraid, to be comfortable being uncomfortable, to be comfortable having those conversations about, race and injustice that need to take place in order for us to build down the current structures and build new structures. So don't be afraid. Really, continue to move forward in this work, continue to work together with community members, and we will eventually get to a fair and equitable transportation system. Next slide, please. Oh, and just for more information, visit our website, rydindigo.com and betterbikesharepartnership.org. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Waffiyyah. And just for the audience at home, I would just say that it is 7 a.m. where Waffiyyah is. So double thank you for being with us so early in the morning. Just as we're waiting for more questions to come through, and again, guys at home, I'd really welcome your questions in the chat. So remember that it's the event and then chat and Q&A. If you go into the Q&A there, then questions will come through. Waffiyyah, I had a question about community consultation, which is, how do you find the communities that you're talking to? Are you working through individuals? Are you working through other third sector organizations? How do you find people that you need to hear?
I'm so sorry, Richard. I don't know why, for some reason it's coming in muffled and I can't really hear clearly what to say. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Can you hear me a bit better now?
Maybe we can put your question in the chat and then I can. Yes, so sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Don't worry. Let me do it that way. Okay. Can you see the questions? Oh, if you can't hear me, then. Dave, can you just tell me if you can hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine, Rachel, thanks. But we may not have access for Waffiyyah to actually see the questions in that section. Can you see them in there, Waffiyyah? Yeah,
so she can see the ones in there. Okay, brilliant.
Great.
The best laid plans, as they say. Let's have a go. So I'm just sending questions across, guys at home.
What community group? Oh, sorry. What community groups have been most interested in transportation projects? So honestly, really all of the community groups or communities that I've, worked with have been interested in projects. I think there's a lot of, often mistrust of so I work specifically in bike share. And so I work to help incorporate bike sharing in communities. And so what I found is that the community members aren't necessarily not interested in biking or bike share. A lot of times they're not sure if, okay, are you really putting this bike share system here for us? Is it a sign of gentrification? Are you putting this here for others that are moving into our community? Because there's so much changing, right? So much has changed from the original feel of the community. They've got new stores and new coffee shops and new routes popping up that aren't necessarily catered to their needs and their desires. And so when you come in and you talk about bike share, they may be interested, but they're not trusting. And so it's important to really like build that trust, right? To talk through like, what are some of the things that you are interested in? What are some of the, challenges of the community right now? What are some of the highlights of your community? How can we work together to see how, bike sharing can support that? So if a community is struggling with, health concerns, biking can be a great way to help, support a healthy lifestyle. If, folks are trying to get back and forth to work, bike share can be a really affordable way to get back and forth to work. So really helping to make connections to things that are meaningful to that community, and then really showing up to do what you say, right? Because that's how you build that trust. Saying that I'm going to do this and we're going to work together to do it. And then as people see that you're standing by what you say, that trust builds and word of mouth spreads. So then when you go to work with the next community or the next group, you have someone that can vouch for you and say, yeah, they're really about what they're saying. And that's how you build the trust, and that's how you build the network of trust with community members, and are able to expand in that way.
There's another couple of questions.
Community members. Yes, absolutely. And I should have mentioned that in my presentation, but compensation is so important. Like I mentioned, community members are experts. And so they should be compensated in that way. Like when people are working on a project and you bring on a consultant to scope out something, you wouldn't just invite a consultant to lunch and say, give me all of your ideas, give me all of your information, I'll cover lunch and thank you. That would not happen. You would have to pay that invoice. And so it's important to understand that community members bring a lot of value to your project, and they put in a lot of time and effort. And so they should be compensated fairly. So yes, we do compensate them. What engagement activities have worked best? Rides. So for me with bike share, we found that the best way to, show people about the bikes is to get them on the bikes. And so we offer free community rides. We also offer classes to, teach people how to ride a bike, to show people how to ride safely, what are the rules of the road, what are the rights of the cyclist. We also support different community events and activities that are in the area. So offering that education and encouragement in addition to that community engagement is really important.
Thank you so much, Waffiyyah. That's
absolutely. Thank you so much. And sorry for the technical
difficulties. No, not at all. These things happen. As I say, it's 7 a.m, so I don't think any of us will hold it against you at all. Brilliant. Thank you. So next of all, we're going to hear from Debs Allan. Debs is from the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations. Debs, thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you, Rachael and all of CoMo for inviting me along to share with you today. And firstly, what I'd say is I absolutely can't emphasize how much I agree with what Waffiyyah was saying about the importance of community in these decisions. But first of all, in terms of me, who am I? I am the Innovation and Future Thinking Manager here at the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations. So we are the membership federation for the Scottish social housing sector. And my background is within community investment and regeneration work within the social housing sector. So hopefully that brings something to this particular party. So I thought it might be valuable, first off, to give you a bit of context, because I know that we've a UK-wide, if not international, audience today. So I thought it might give you a little bit of context about the Scottish social housing sector and the uniqueness, possibly, of it. So there are 150 registered social landlords or cooperatives in Scotland. That doesn't take into consideration any local authority housing. That's simply social housing. Many are situated in the most deprived communities as measured by the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, and are areas that can be faced by significant disadvantage and inequality generally. Our members, our RSLs and co-ops are so much more than landlords. They provide activities that fall under a wider community investment remit, investing resources, time and money into the communities in which they sit. So this slide's a little bit out of date, because as of today's date, we represent 140 of the of 150 registered RSLs and social landlords in Scotland. The smallest being the Aberdeen Sir Optimus Society with only 15 units, to the Weekly Group with only over 90,000 units, and all shapes and sizes in between. Our members provide homes and wider role support services for nearly 296,000 people across all 32 Scottish local authority areas, including rural and island communities and the very dense urban areas such as Glasgow and Edinburgh. So what works well? I think the Scottish social housing sector are known for trailblazing and for looking at new ideas and opportunities that will try to mitigate the inequality and poverty and stigma sometimes that can be faced by those living within social housing. So we have members who have car clubs, and this develops a real sense of pride in the local area. New technologies it delivers first. And this subsidises access to or shared car ownerships, avoids people having to purchase cars themselves. It also can circumvent mobility allowance and disability payments, where people are only needing to use a vehicle for a short period of time every week, and that adds an additional drain onto low-income families' outgoings. So as you may know, people who are on certain disability benefits can either choose an additional premium or they can choose Motability. So as I say, if they're using a Motability car for just a very short period of time every week, rather than having that cash straight into their bank account, the car club model can support people to not have to do that. And also, car clubs very often are EV vehicles, they're electronic vehicles, and therefore by definition automatic. And that can substitute the huge investment in a Motability vehicle whilst allowing accessibility for people who may have physical disabilities. So we have members who engage, obviously, as I say, in car clubs, but also who are creating transport hubs. So Linstone Housing in Linwood, Renfrewshire, which is an area just outside of Glasgow. You may have heard of Paisley, which is the nearest town. Linstone Housing are introducing a range of wheeling options for A to B transportation, but also for leisure purposes. So they have a car club that's well established and that they subsidise for their tenants. Staff members also use that. They also have, with another 11 of our members just received funding from Cycling Scotland to put more infrastructure and more freewheeling in place. So Linstone Housing are putting electric bikes in. They are trying to make sure that people have options, and options that are cost effective and that work for them within their community. And if I can give you an example of the electric bike or car club benefit, the only supermarket that there is in Linwood locally is Tesco's, which, as we know, other supermarkets are available, but they aren't necessarily one of the budget supermarkets. A taxi to the local budget supermarkets costs about £15 as a round trip. So if you can imagine that being able to use a car club membership, which is subsidised by the Housing Association, to be able to do that weekly shop at a far significantly less cost is attractive to tenants of our members. And it really is a tangible unpicking of that equality gap. And I think it's also important that we're moving towards viewing mobility scooters as a form of wheeling. Active transport. If the only way that somebody can get out and about is by using a mobility scooter, then that's active transport for them. So our members are recognising more and more the need to provide storage and charging facilities for not only car clubs and the electric bike schemes, but also for mobility scooters. Indeed, I heard anecdotally yesterday that we've got one member who are renovating old drying rooms that all tower blocks and flats have, because obviously the inclement weather in Scotland, these drying rooms people don't use anymore. So they're very often used as dumping grounds. They're very often used as they can be fire hazards. They could be places of antisocial behaviour. So we have members who are actually renovating those drying rooms into storage for bicycles and buying D-locks so people can have their own bicycles stored there, but for mobility scooters. So it's just about that innovative solutions and trying to think outside of the box. Just because something's been used in one way or something has been one way for a period of time doesn't mean that should continue to be so. So having looked at what works well, it's always important, I think, to look at what could be even better. So often investments made by larger companies or investments made into transport hubs move immediately into middle-class areas. And irrationally, they avoid the most deprived areas. Yes, there's so much to be gained by improving transport inequalities. And often there's a higher density audience that's more receptive to change in the communities of social landlords. Be that because the density, because they're living in high-rise blocks, be that because in Glasgow obviously we have tenements. So there's we need there to be an awareness, I guess, that as community anchors, which is what our members, the social housing sector sees itself as, we understand what the needs are of our communities. We work very closely within our communities and respond to their needs. So we can tell external investors what is needed in the area. Come to us and have that conversation. I think shared access to tricycles, cargo bikes, e-bikes is really important. We have that in spaces. So I say Linstone Housing in Renfrewshire is installing e-bikes. And as I say, there has been that funding. Maryhill Housing, which is in the west of Glasgow, are very involved within the Glaswegian bike share scheme, electric bike share scheme. These bring down individual transport costs and avoid capital purchases. So what we're constantly doing as a sector is recognizing the fact that without generalizing, many of the people who live within our homes are facing deprivation or are facing an uphill battle in terms of that there's very often more months than there is money. So we're very, very invested in trying to find ways of reducing outgoings. And this is one of the ways that we see is absolutely there. I think in terms of community benefit investment, so as part of any procurement exercise, the Scottish housing sector is very heavily regulated in all aspects, and particularly when it comes to procurement. So our members are required to look at community benefit clauses as part of their procurement exercises. So it's, again, this can be we want this innovative thinking. We want this thinking outside the box. If you're wanting to come and do some work with one of our members, what can you bring that's a little bit different that might make your bid or your tender seem more attractive than others because of the community investment that you're prepared to bring with it? And finally, on this point, I think is where there is good practice, like Maryhill, like Linstone, like some of our colleagues in Edinburgh. It's piecemeal and it's dependent on individual relationships rather than as a strategic joined-up approach. So as a sector, we would welcome conversations about how we overcome this, and we would be very much welcome people coming to us and saying, okay, we have this offering, we've got this product, we have this service. How do we get there? How do we pilot? How do we get it in front of your members? But also with the recognition that our members are custodians of tenants' rents and therefore don't have bottomless pits of money to spend on new approaches. So funded opportunities are always very, very welcome, and that comes back into the external investment. So for more information, I'll just chat about how you can get involved. My details will be shared, but I'm absolutely delighted to speak to anybody collectively or individually about how you could get involved with the Scottish housing sector. And thanks ever so much. I look forward, hopefully, to hearing some of your questions this morning. This afternoon. I'm thinking I'm there in Chicago with Waffiyyah.
I like your wishful thinking, Debs, and thank you so much for your presentation. I am hoping that we are about to launch the poll, so that can be kind of churning over in the background. And like magic, there it goes. So the question is, who else needs to be involved in this conversation beyond transport organisations? So, for example, housing associations, job centres, socially focused charities. So, folks, please do add your ideas into there. Debs, I had a question for you about, you mentioned community benefit clauses. Social value and measuring social value is something that we talk about quite a lot at CoMoUK, and I wanted to get your impression of how effective those measures are. Are they something that you think need to have a bit more bite to them, or do you think it works where it is that kind of optional suggestion, I guess?
I think with a community investment, socially motivated head on, I think that we can use a carrot or we can use a stick, and some organisations are very open to providing that community benefit and providing that social insight. Others less so. So I think that there's a happy medium. There's a balance to be struck between prescribing what is required and supporting spontaneity, I guess. So I think in terms of social insight, I think it's really important that we're able to measure how what the impact of what it is that we're doing. And we at SFHA have developed a social insight toolkit that is used by our members, which is different from a social return on investment because it's not measured in for every pound spent you get X amount back, but it's about what impact have activities had, and what monetary value would need to be placed on those for that. So, for instance, we know that getting somebody who's been unemployed into work full-time at living wage has out with their remuneration or their salary or things like that, the benefit to their well-being would cost £15,000 to have. So that's, so it's a monetary way that we can work out how people are impacted positively. And I think it's really, really important to say, from a community investment background, one of the challenges we've always had is how do we demonstrate to funders, how do we demonstrate to our boards actually the difference that's been made by the activities we're taking.
Yeah.
So I think, hoping that kind of answers what you asked me.
Absolutely does. No, it absolutely does. It's a really brilliant answer. And I think as well, it's really interesting to hear kind of how your previous experience has kind of informed how you're fulfilling your role now. We've had some things come into the poll while we've been chatting that I'll just take you through, and just kind of, if there's anything that you think is missing, it keeps moving. So this is going to be exciting. So other people who our listeners think should be involved include communities, job centres, insurance companies, community groups. Employers is a really good one. And I'll just make a punt here for the CoMoUK Employer Action Kit. It's on the website. Retail groups, healthcare, land use planning departments. Is there anybody who's sort of the elephant in the room missing from that list in your view?
I'm really pleased to see communities appears to be kind of front and centre. I say, as Waffiyyah alluded to, indicated, communities know what they want. They know what they don't want, and they can be alienated really quickly. In terms of who else, I think it's really important actually that national governments, regional and national governments are involved in this conversation. Because, as I say, when I answered your last question, Rachael, about the carrot and stick, sometimes this happens organically because it's the right people are in the right place at the right time. Sometimes it happens because legislation and regulation encourages. So I think that the governments, be that the devolved government in Holyrood and Wales or the Welsh Senate, or whether that's the Westminster government, really need to be, and pardon the pun, driving this initiative about, and that is in part about affordability. That's a part about policy documents, and really that the narrative needs to be supportive.
That's really helpful. Debs, thank you so much. I think we will bring you back in when we kind of do a a full group question at the end, but thank you so much for your insight. That's been enormously helpful. Next, I will welcome to the stage, please, Kevin Orr from Liftango, our sponsors.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. It's great to be here. Thanks to CoMoUK for putting this on. So my name is Kevin Orr. I'm the CEO of Liftango. We provide demand responsive transport solutions. Easiest way to describe it, I suppose, is instead of having a fixed route bus system like we previously had in the last 60, 70 years, you can use technology to have a more flexible, dynamic bus system that incorporates more of your community, provides greater access for people to travel where they want, when they want, rather than a traditional fixed service, which is a little bit more rigid. Our company vision is to unlock all the good that comes from shared transport, and the view of this session, or the discussion on this session, is to see if transport is fair. And I think within the bus industry, we feel that it isn't as fair as it could be. There's certain areas that are treated the same as, for example, in a city where you have a fixed route service, loads of passengers are able to access that service, and there's a high density as well that help that. Once you move into the suburbs or the more rural parts of our countries and communities, that fixed route service, it becomes less of a fit for purpose. It's more connecting towns together rather than moving people around their community when and where they want to go. And there's quite long, lengthy times in between transport access. So we look at those areas and go, is there a better solution? And demand responsive transport for the past sort of 5 years has been proven to be working better in a number of areas, both from a usability viewpoint, economical, and increased coverage viewpoint. So just some of the problems we see on the ground that we are helping to solve sustainably is sort of highlighted here. So taking Jane first. Jane is living by herself still, living more rurally, but is no longer driving. So how can she maintain her social circle? How can she be part of the community, go to markets, stay involved in the service? So demand responsive transport fits in nicely for solving her needs. And we see that across many of our projects in rural areas. Another example is young Lucas here, who's newly employed, doesn't have a car yet, but is entering the job ladder. How can we help facilitate his access to regular shifts or regular 9-to-5 patterns, and do it sustainably so he can save his money from not having to purchase a car? And then on the final sort of situation that we see a lot of is Ranald having to access hospital and medical appointments, alongside getting access to medicines. How can we keep his transport needs, arranged and low when he needs, this additional assistance through this period of his life? So we see a lot of demand responsive transport aimed at people who are sick and elderly. And our solution, is a technology solution that helps optimize a number of areas and provide a greater personalization and passenger experience. So at the outset, it's capturing more of the passenger needs at time of booking. Do they need an accessible vehicle, for example? What types of care do they maybe need on that vehicle? If it's a medical or paratransit type situation, do they need a special machine on those vehicles as well? So capture that up front and make sure vehicles are sent with the right coverage. Again, increasing coverage, so your access, you no longer need to live near a fixed route bus service or a bus stop. You can live where you want to live and still access the same modes of transport as people who do live near, a trunk route. So more passengers and more coverage through that opening out of accessibility to the medium of transport. And finally, what's quite important is actually trying to keep the economics down for the service to your community. And we have the operations portal that manages a lot of that. So it's all the data they could ever need, which is extremely rich compared to other modes of transport out there. And you can start making planning decisions based on the economics of what you're seeing through the portal. Just some of the examples of where we've launched. So up here is the Battle Creek up in Michigan, not too far from one of our other panelists. So we launched this 18 months ago or so now. It's a large area, about 1,715 miles region that you can access through, I guess, calling up to book and notified through text messages or using a mobile application as well. And there's been huge uptake since we launched there, and the greater access, obviously, to transport. Down here, we've got our Vita, which is an aged care facility in New Zealand, transporting people around, connecting them in with their local communities as well, and the people who live in the aged care facility as well. And this one is in the UK, down in North Lincolnshire. It's the Just Go service. So again, a rather large area, 515 square miles. And transporting people all around the community, connecting into other major interchanges, train, buses, but also getting people to the local market, getting people to see friends on a Thursday and those sorts of trips as well. DRT's value to the community is that it fits in between the personalization and flexibility of a car without having, I guess, the rigidness, but obviously mass transit appeal of the fixed route bus. It's somewhere in between, fits nicely into the lower density areas such as the suburbs or rural and regional parts. Increases coverage, increases flexibility and experience. And it also makes use of existing assets like buses that are already used in those regions or sitting there potentially unused in some cases. So we're seeing, I guess, previously you would have lots of vehicles assigned to it, I guess, a siloed use case like medical transportation, for example. Then you'd have another silo for community transport, another silo for dial-a-ride. You can start to blur the lines between those different siloed use cases with technology and the optimization that you can go behind. So those vehicles can be used to greater effect or not used inefficiently as well. We also provide, I guess, a transport solution into the sort of private sectors as well, where mobility needs are necessary as well. So shuttle service, demand responsive, carpool for such clients such as Nike, Tesla here as well. And that is really connecting people who typically do shift work into, I guess, the factories that are typically on the outskirts of major hubs or cities, and making sure they have a equitable access to get to and from work much more easily than if they were left to their own devices. And similarly, we're seeing a lot more, I guess, reporting of CO2 emissions that aren't just direct emissions, they're scope 3 indirect emissions. And those sustainability strategies and agendas that the companies have are leading them to think more about transport and effectively how they can move their staff around more sustainably, which is great to see. Overarching all this, we do a lot of simulations, big data geeks here. We do a lot of this just to make sure that we're launching the right service with the right design in the right areas and not launching in the wrong areas as well. So very big on lots of insight up front before making, I guess, the big decisions. So we've been doing this across the world, started in Australia about 5 years ago, numerous projects across North America, Canada, and into Europe now, more recently as well. So we are based up here predominantly in Scotland, although spread a little around the UK, but we have global offices in Australia, North America, and here in Scotland. And working with some big names. So in the public transport sphere, it's Transdev's the largest global passenger transporter for the bus industry. Go Ahead Bus Group's third largest bus operator here in the UK, and various others around the regions that we operate. And similarly, some of the corporates we work with, such as Unilever, IKEA, have hugely ambitious sustainability strategies, and we typically work with those types of clients. So just very quickly, just a very quick case study on what we've been up to. So this is the Good Friends Go service, the aged care facility transportation solution that we've offered across New Zealand. So it runs in Christchurch and a few more other sites around there. We're seeing about almost 20% of those trips being wheelchair accessible necessary trips. So very high compared to many of our other services. Average trip time is only 8 minutes, so you're moving people around fairly short distances around their communities, but you are increasing, I guess, the access to those areas that otherwise would be unavailable. Peak travel times is between 11 and 2, which is typically off-peak for most other transport areas. So it shows you how the different demographics do travel, and it's quite interesting. And the service has actually been expanded already. And very quickly, there's slightly different statistics for our Battle Creek BC Go solution. So a lot more people using, because it's more public transport, generic, I suppose. It's a 68% passengers using a technical device, a mobile phone application, but you still get an awful lot of people calling as well, 30%. Trip time's a little larger, 13 minutes, probably offset by the large zone that we operate in. And trip requests is typically the 2 p.m. each day, which is another interesting insight. With people using this service, we do have an advanced booking feature of 28 days. People using this service as their primary form of transport across, say, a whole month or more. And the Just Go North Links project as well in the UK is it's one of the largest geographic DRT zones in the UK, 515 square miles. There's certain areas that are very well serviced by fixed route that we don't operate in, but we do connect into and out of those regions. So we are very much working in around an existing commercial fixed route service and filling in the gaps with our DRT zone, which is quite interesting because you can see almost DRT as a safety net in this example, that should any fixed route operators decide to take a fixed route service away, which they do and have done, I guess, a lot more recently due to COVID, the DRT service is there that can pick up these types of passengers who rely on a bus service and don't have any other option. We've seen that happen, I guess, across the sort of 18 months we've launched here. So exciting project, lots happening in that space as well up there. And I will end the conference there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That's great. I am seeing that we're having some tech issues behind the scenes. So folks, if you are in, please do not refresh because it may chuck you out. So could we please launch the poll? If we've got the poll going in the background, that'd be really helpful. Thank you. Kevin, I've got a couple of things that I wanted to ask you about. One of them is data, because we spoke in one of the sessions this morning about data. And one of the things I really liked that you mentioned was making journeys more efficient by using appropriate vehicles for each individual journey. How do you balance the need for quite precise data about what access needs people may have with their kind of privacy, who you might be sharing that with in terms of operators? How do you find that balance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, actually. Is the GDPR has really helped a lot of that. It's made that very clear, which is great. But I guess the history has been that the TNCs, transport, the Ubers, I suppose, of the world, wouldn't share their data with cities. And that was causing a gap in the decision-making, almost the insightful decision-making for these cities. So we do something different. We provide the ownership to our clients so they can share it around as they see fit. Also, no sharing with third parties. It's not accepted these days as it may have been in the past. So the ownership is basically for the councils and for the bus operators, and the security, I guess, across all that to make sure that is all controlled. And terms and conditions, obviously, as well.
That's really helpful. And the other thing I really wanted to ask you about was, so you mentioned kind of where there is public transport, fitting around that, filling those gaps, and obviously in more rural areas that may, there may not be a public transport network that you're fitting into. It may be one big gap. So I guess my question is, are those two different experiences, both from your perspective, but I guess also from the perspective of the individual who's potentially used to very little shared transport, suddenly having this new option on their doorstep?
Yeah, it's a hugely different. It's between a high density city environment. It's a very different environment in a rural setting for a number of reasons. But the main reason being the transport options in rural areas aren't really there. There's the public bus in most cases, possibly a train, but you don't get too many bike shares. You don't get any Uber, I guess, style services going there because it's not economical. Scooter shares, again, they focus on the high density. So you definitely have a reliance of people onto the car or the bus. So when they do get a service that's kind of technology enabled and exciting and a little bit more on demand, or even pre-booked as well to organize your week, there is, I guess, an excitement around the community, which is great to see. You're bringing that into an area that would normally, I guess, be able to access it unless they travel to a city. And I guess if you take the city side, because they do have so much access to the Ubers and the on-demand style, like true on-demand style of trip booking, they are probably less inclined to use a service unless it is truly on demand. So the pre-booking features, waiting, say, 30 minutes, 45 minutes that we might do in a rural setting because of the large distances, you can't have that in a sort of more denser area. You've got to have more vehicles and have it more on demand. So yeah, it's very different citizen mindset at the same time as the geographic constraints that you get in a rural area to density as well.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I guess then my next question would be around women and girls and how you as an operator kind of are able to find equity from a gender perspective in your service. Because, you know, we had some conversations yesterday about sort of the public realm in which women and girls live. And of course, that will extend into transport. So it'd be kind of great to get your perspective on that as well.
Yeah, I think the bus industry statistics on equity is quite good compared to a lot of other parts of transport. And we are the same. So working in with public transport, it typically is a higher majority of women than men traveling on our services. That does vary depending on the type of use case, but if it's public transport, it would be typically a higher population of women. What we see, I think, about our technology-enabled solution is that it's a lot safer for women especially. So you are getting dropped off at your house or closer to your house. You're not having to walk the kilometer home from a bus stop through the woods that you've set to short. Things like that, which we see more of. And actually the Rural Mobility Fund has focused on some of the safety aspects and also the transport strategy that we've seen from transport industry as well. So they're starting to understand that there's I guess definitely at the more later evening to night services, that there is a need to take ownership for the safety of getting people home and closer to their home and a technology enabled way to share communication, track who it was, those sorts of things just help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kevin. That's great. As you say, we'll bring you back in for the kind of group questions at the end, but thank you so much. Next of all, can we please go to Sam Hunn from Fonix?
Brilliant. Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sam from Fonix Mobile Payments. First of all, obviously, I just want to say thank you to all the attendees, the fellow speakers, and obviously CoMo for organising the event. We are relatively new to sort of the world of transport and mobility. So it's been a great learning experience for us over the last couple of days, understanding what's working for everyone and what the sort of current challenges are. At Fonix, we work specifically in the payments arena. Historically, we've worked in charity and media, more recently moving into things like parking and now transport mobility. And when it comes to accessibility, social equity, inclusion, we feel we can help maintain fairness as this space kind of grows. And I think we all know how rapidly it's growing and how exciting that the space is. The reason we became involved in transport mobility is much like parking. It's a market that is becoming more and more ticketless and tech focused, which is great. But when we remove something like cash as a payment option, sort of the world of payments then can become quite non-negotiable, often only including card payments. And we need to ensure that we don't leave certain demographics behind with the sort of rapid progress that's being made. So first of all, today I've got a nice cheesy video for you, and then I'll just go through a little bit about us and our carrier billing solutions. And then most importantly, I'll run through some of the ways in which our payment options promote and deliver fairness, particularly within sort of micromobility and across the whole sort of transport industry. Lastly, I've got a mock-up sort of prototype of how this solution could look integrated into sort of a mobility setting. So if I just give you this lovely cheesy, oh, is this going to work? No, it's not liking it.
Sorry, Sam, I'm afraid we're not able to play videos through that way. So we'll need to skip that portion, I'm afraid. Sorry.
That's fine. I cover everything in the video anyway. We'll talk through it anyway. So going straight through just kind of a rough explanation of direct carrier billing. So essentially it is just a method of payment that allows the end user to pay for, in this case, their session or their trip using their mobile phone bill. In this instance, I've used the major UK carriers as an example. However, we do work across Europe, in Canada, and we would be interested in looking at kind of any global market within transport mobility. On the right hand side here, you can see that our sort of pay by mobile option is just sat alongside some existing options that already exist in the sector. So it's not there as a sort of separate entity. It's very much just kind of a luxury option for the user. As I said, most importantly, just looking at kind of some of the challenges that we feel that this helps overcome, and we're seeing is helping to overcome in the case studies we've got so far. The most important one being sort of the underbanked viewpoint. Is crucial in how sort of carrier billing can help deliver fairness in the space. There is a small portion of the UK market that can be described as unbanked. So, globally, we know there are 5 mobile phone users for each payment card user. But within the UK, 7 to 10% of the UK phone user market is still using pay-as-you-go. So this could well be cash in hand workers that, of course, we don't want to be excluding from all the wonderful cashless mobility schemes that are being developed. There's a larger percentage of the population that would be defined as underbanked. So, I've clicked the thing accidentally there. Underbanked. So perhaps they don't have a credit card or maybe even a debit card for an existing bank account that they have. Maybe they get paid into. Carrier billing would allow a user that maybe doesn't have a credit card or is perhaps from a lower income situation, a line of credit, providing that their mobile network approves that. For example, if someone needs to pay for something but doesn't really have the cash right then and there, could do with paying it as part of their mobile phone bill. Because we have to remember that in many instances, the use of, say, an e-scooter or an e-bike would be a luxury purchase to save someone a long walk or to help someone catch up if they're running slightly late. I've heard on calls this week that the majority demographic for micromobility remains the affluent, and I think a flexible payment solution would allow sort of lower income or underbanked demographics access to the innovations that are sort of emerging within mobility. Essentially, with the work we've been doing so far, we're working with one large e-scooter business and one large e-bike business. As I said, we're still quite new to transport mobility. And it is too soon to sort of make sweeping statements, but we are seeing an active use of our payment option without a decline in use of the traditional payment options, which is really encouraging because we obviously wouldn't want to be there just the same amount of users are registering, but we're just taking custom away from card payments. The second point here is commuter queues. So another benefit of direct carrier billing is that it can be quicker than traditional card payments. If a user is providing their mobile number as a part of the sign-up process, we can just take the payment from there as long as they confirm. We can even put in there a two-factor authentication step where we can send them a code essentially via SMS, and then they enter that. I'm sure you've seen this on other sites online. They type in a 4-digit code, it verifies that it's them, and away we go. This can obviously save the end user time and perhaps in some instances an element of frustration. Cash free. Now, obviously, we're all aware of the tremendous time-saving and environmental benefits that come with a cashless solution. So I won't preach to the choir on that one. Proliferation. This is another challenge that I've been made aware of over the course of this event. Proliferating mobility schemes beyond urban hubs, pushing for adoption within suburban or rural or even sort of remote areas. A payment through direct carrier billing doesn't require an internet connection, cellular or phone signal to be processed. And I feel this could be essential in implementing a successful mobility scheme in more remote areas that may struggle for strong signal. Finally, this method of payment can be more secure. So on the theft and fraud front, when we put in things like two-factor authentication, it means that person doesn't need to just have the mobile number or the physical phone. They need to, have access to the phone. Can't just use their mate's phone number to pay for a session. But likewise, if they picked a card up off the floor or maybe something a bit more nefarious than that, you've got the long card number, you've got the expiry date, you've got the CVC. You can pay for something like this. So yeah, in terms of ensuring that it's being used properly, it can really help with that as well. Just moving on into sort of practically how it could look integrated into sort of an existing mobility solution. So if you see here, it's all the usual stuff, logging on, signing up. This is obviously part of an e-scooter, a dummy e-scooter kind of business. Registering that is the scooter they want to be using. And again, like I said earlier, it's just another option here alongside the usuals. Completing the payment in this sort of example, there is no two-factor authentication. The mobile number has been taken as part of the setup, so it is simply just pay and then away you go, and then on sort of the confirmation screen there. So I mean, ultimately what we're talking about is promoting fairness in sort of a rapidly growing industry through the luxury of choice for the end user was kind of the initial intent. However, what we're finding that is in doing so, we are enticing use from maybe demographics that perhaps were previously unable to access sort of these amazing new mobility schemes that are coming to the fore now. That's kind of the end of the presentation. If anybody has any questions at all or would like to talk through this any other time, do let me know. And thank you all once again.
Thank you, Sam. That was so interesting. And I think it's just great to hear just a different option. I did have a couple of questions, one of which is, how quick is it to set up? So it's your first time using. What is the sort of setup time, I guess? Really,
the main benefits in terms of speed fall in favour of carrier billing for something like this, because if you are a one-time user, a first-time user, you don't really need to go through maybe as many steps as you do at the moment. Obviously, we are looking to integrate with existing micromobility businesses, and they may want to take on certain information about their users, and far be it from us to tell them what they should not do in sort of the name of speeding up the process. But it can be as simple as, please type in your mobile number, the code comes through, the code is put into the whatever kind of portal you're using, and that's pay done. So you don't have to sort of type in all your credit card details. You don't even need to type in your name or your email address or what you may have to do at the moment. If you did want to just make it as quick as a process as possible. No, that's really interesting. I think it's just because we speak a lot about kind of making shared transport, shared mobility an easier default than the private car. So it's just kind of interesting to hear that every single part of that process kind of can be slimmed down in this way. So that's really
interesting. The other thing I wanted to ask you about was the age of users. Kind of, you mentioned demographics being quite interesting, and I was kind of hoping you could maybe elaborate on that a wee bit.
Well, this is where the more
GDPR, obviously, I get that.
Well, unfortunately, the only data that we really collect is which mobile numbers are being used, and everything else that you can get from the sort of the system that we are integrated with. So only if that system has a criteria or a field which says how old are you would we be able to know. Unfortunately, we can't get those details from the back end. So a big GDPR issue, as you can imagine.
Yeah, of course. Okay, now that's really, and I guess that's the other side of that coin, isn't it, of it being so sort of quick and easy to go, is that you kind of lose that data. That's really interesting. I guess my next question would be, do you think that kind of there is growth in this area? Because I think, we hear more and more about this utopian cashless society, and I kind of, it would be interesting to get your sort of 10-year forecast on the work that you guys are doing.
Well, I feel obviously it is really exciting, everything kind of becoming more and more cashless and fewer touch kind of processes in every walk of life here. But cash is becoming more and more redundant in these kind of areas, and you have to think about the demographics that are comfortable with cash. When you remove that as an option, what are you putting in there to kind of balance that up? Especially if you're in a situation where you are trying to convince as many different demographics within the public to adopt something that's new and not necessarily that familiar. Everybody uses their phone. Everyone knows their own phone number. Just maybe making, like we said earlier, bringing down the length of time it takes, or how much information you have to give may convince people to be a bit more, may adopt it a little bit quicker. We're finding that, obviously, like I say, it's in every instance that we use carrier billing, we find that it is used by the general public. It's always up against card payments and sometimes also cash payments in certain instances. You've also got the likes of PayPal, things like that. There are all other options. It always gets used, so that's always a bit of vindication for us. But I think as well, what we're trying to do is with these cashless systems, combat what is maybe a bit of a monopoly from the card companies. I've seen over the last couple of weeks or so that from early January, Amazon aren't going to be accepting credit card payments through Visa. Now, that's great, and I'm sure that Amazon will be making their point. Visa will go away and look at their numbers and come back, and they'll be let back in. But we're not all Amazon. We don't all have that kind of pull where we can go, well, we're just not going to use you then until you give us lower rates. If you're implementing other options for the end user, well, that's fine. But we've got a backup option. We don't need everything to go through card payments. It takes a little bit more power away from, and you've got a little bit more control over your rates, a bit less kind of handcuffed in that sense.
That democratization of it, I think, is really fascinating, isn't it? And kind of where could it be in the future is sort of, there's a lot to think about there. Sam, thank you so much. I will bring you back at the end of the session if that's okay with you.
Brilliant.
And thank you. And hand over, last but very much not least, to Janet Hudson from Leicester City Council, who is very, very kindly stepping in last minute. So she's going to, this is proper theatre style. The understudy has arrived. It's very exciting. So thank you very much, Janet.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to CoMo for the opportunity to present this work. So I'm Janet Hudson. I'm from Leicester City Council. And I am the social inclusion lead for the Leicester Bike Share scheme. So just briefly, the Bike Share scheme is a partnership between Leicester City Council and Santander. They are our major sponsor, but it's as I go through the presentation, we do work with other organisations, and I'll just explain the context of that. So the question that we were asked was the early months, where are we in the journey? So this is 2019, back in the day when you could congregate, and we knew that we would be implementing bike share docking stations within a particular neighbourhood. This neighbourhood in Leicester city centre is the 11th most deprived ward in the country, and the pictures are on a mugger pitch, a multi-user games area pitch that was brilliantly supported by the Johan Cruyff Foundation, who, just as an aside, is the first philanthropic footballer. But it's a superb area in this neighbourhood. And so we chose this as the location that we would begin some training sessions. And these are women-only training sessions. They are delivered by women. So the photo on the right is one of our female trainers. They were delivered by women for women. The picture bottom left shows alongside the actual cycle training that we would also do orientation rides. So this is all about applying the knowledge that you have. A number of the new communities that arrive in Leicester City are housed in this neighbourhood. So any understanding of the orientation of the city, there's a park, and the proximity to the park is no more than half a mile, and a number of the ladies had no idea that the park was there. So we started on this journey, and this was all with the idea of moving forward to we'll teach them to ride, we'll take them around the city, and then we'll give them access to the bike share scheme. So obviously COVID strikes, and we had to rethink our strategy. So during 2020, we were able to convince our line managers, who were very supportive, but to give away our bike fleets. Any of the training bikes that we had, that Leicester City Council had, we weren't going to be able to use them. So we developed Bikeaid, and this was targeted at the, oh my goodness, I've forgotten, the NHS predominantly, teachers, anybody that the primary workers that needed to get to work, with the reduction in the bus services and obviously the downsizing of public transport. So we made our bikes available. We put a call out and we received donated bikes from the good folk of Leicestershire. So the infographic on the right hand side just shows how many people, the effect of the campaign, and 65% of the recipients were women. So this was just reinforcing what we'd already discovered in the earlier project. There is an appetite, there is a demand to learn to ride a bike, and particularly amongst women. So moving on to what went well. Well, we would say that we've managed to launch our bike share scheme. So this was in January last year. It was a soft launch. We needed to go through beta testing. We had volunteers to see, obviously no system is glitch free. So we had volunteers out riding. To date, this is as in the 8th of December. So far, we've had 38,000 and a half hires, and we have 17,000 people registered. In order to use the scheme, you have to be a member. You can be an annual member, a monthly member, or as a pay-as-you-go member, but you do need to register. Interesting what Sam was saying in the previous presentation about authentication, and we've gone through a whole process with that as to how to ensure and combat fraud with regards to who is using the bike. So as far as we're concerned, what went well? Yeah, launching the scheme. This is I apologise if this is too small for people. This is an overview of where we are currently. So as it says, the green are the live docking stations. We've got 50 to implement, 23 are live, with a further 16 hopefully scheduled for January and 17 in February. And you can see that the scheme is beginning to widen, and we do need to move out more to the neighbourhoods. And this is just an example of the metrics. Again, I'm sure that's too small for most people to see, but it does give us a weekly ridership, a daily ride, an understanding of how many rides are happening on a daily basis. So other things that have gone well for us, we have working with Santander. They bring along Dame Jessica Ennis. So she came to do a more formal launch for us in September. And obviously such a high profile athlete does have a knock-on effect. So that's been absolutely fantastic. We've worked in partnership with our local bid, who have enabled us to deliver tactical marketing campaigns where we can offer free £5 free credit. So this is obviously encouraging people to just come and have a go. And then we were fortunate enough to be successful with the DFT's e-cycle extension bid, where we were able to offer free memberships. That's a scheme that we're currently rolling out. I'll come back to that in a moment. But so from a success point of view, we felt that we've got a scheme, we've got some high profile marketing happening, and we've got some funding to actually offer people taster sessions. So what have we learned? So this is this year, this is 2021 in August. Most of you will probably be familiar with the fact that Leicester City Council was Leicester City was subject to extended lockdown. So our ability to actually do any implementation and engagement work was severely limited. But we were able to go back to the St Matthew's training site in August. And this was always the vision for the project. So once the idea being that we would train women, I'm a big believer that women are the key influencers. They will be the game changers. And we were able to take them out on the e-bikes and introduce them to them. So what we've learned really is that whilst we weren't able to do any face-to-face engagement with them, we were able to offer free access to the bikes. It wasn't going to happen. We still need to be there. And I apologise, Waffiyyah, if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, but I absolutely agree with her that trust in the community is key. Working with neighbourhoods, people need to trust you. And this is me, I'm afraid, bit of self-promotion here, but these ladies trusted me to take them out for a ride on these bikes that they've never ridden before. So, but it's not going to happen unless we are able to keep going out and be in the communities. So what challenges have we come across? Well, this is back to, we've got some funding to support rollout of memberships with working with different organisations. We can develop minor sponsors. So Santander are the major sponsor. We can work with other sponsors. They're our minor sponsors. We can work with them, and we've got funding to roll out memberships. Unfortunately, one of the challenges we faced is, as a local authority, this is very new to us. Our back office systems, our colleagues are absolutely fantastic, but we haven't ever had to draw up contracts working with commercial organisations on a bike share scheme where we're only really selling an intangible marketing proposition. So our ability to move this forward has been challenging. We've also had the multiple hits of COVID, of a tanker trapped in the Suez Canal, and of Brexit. So the supply chain has been severely hampered, and our ability to roll out the scheme in the timescales that we originally wanted has been hampered, which is why we're still in the process of getting docking stations out there. So looking at what does the future hold, the programme that we've implemented in St Matthew's, we've identified 5 other areas of the city where we do have docking stations, or we will have docking stations, and we will repeat that programme. So we'll actually go out again into the community. We'll work with any agencies in the community, but put simply, we will just put on training sessions. The St Matthew's programme in 2019 attracted 80 women over a 6-week programme. When we went back again in August, we had to limit it, but we still had 60 women that attended. So the appetite and the demand is there, and it's just about building this confidence and introducing women to women and that buddying impact and showing them. And this is about enabling. So we're going to be doing that, hopefully, if we can, over 5 different areas around the city to develop use of the scheme. We will hopefully now we've put to bed the issues that we've had from an administration perspective. We will be working with additional partners. The DFT, the eCycle Extension Fund, it's a pilot fund, so we have high hopes that will be rolled out again next year, and we can access more funding to provide more free access to the bike share. And then we're looking at developing potentially a GP referral scheme. So the picture here, this docking station is at one of the 3 major hospitals in Leicester City. And the idea that it could be used for rehabilitation, aside from accessing the hospital. And just very briefly, so our social inclusion programme is not just about people accessing the scheme from their daily lives. This is about supporting low-income workers, 24/7 workers. Our partnership with Samworths is all about that particular cohort getting an expensive taxi at 2 o'clock in the morning to get home, eats into the 10-hour shift that you've just earned. So yeah, a bit of a whirlwind, but I hope that's given you a brief overview of the kind of work that we're looking to do. Thank you very much.
Janet, thank you so much. Honestly, I've been writing down questions, and then every time I'm like, what about X? You then say, and we're doing X. And I'm like, oh, right, scrub that out, go again. It's brilliant to hear so much about your scheme, and thank you for taking us through it in that detail, the kind of the highs and the lows. I'd almost forgotten the Suez Canal. Yeah, it was a lifetime ago now, but it's like, oh yeah, I remember that. I had a question about children. I think the focus on women is incredible, and I think that there's so much in that I was kind of nodding along to. I wondered what you think to how we get children to value shared transport, the bike, higher than that kind of aspirational concept of the private car. How do we kind of bring that younger generation with us?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question. So you have to be 14 to ride the e-bike as a start. But obviously, like other local authorities, Leicester have a comprehensive bikeability program that they roll out across the city. But we also do lots of family engagement. So we do lots of guided rides, led rides, and they are all family focused. We, back in the day, used to do the mass participation rides that people know as Sky Rides probably, or the city rides. But Leicester, we've moved to, instead of doing one big event, we've moved to a monthly event on a Sunday, which we call our Open Streets event. And this whole idea of opening up the city as a playground, animating the city. And because we deliver it, it's all bike focused as well. So it was going off on tangent, but Leicester City Council also does a lot of infrastructure work. We've got a great network of segregated cycle tracks that we have and are implementing. So this whole idea, we're always looking for ways to encourage people to come into the city by bike and then use their bike when they're in the city.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I think the next thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned GP referrals, was kind of where do you see bike share within social prescribing? Because, I think we spoke about health in one of the sessions yesterday and how so much bike share can really contribute to health outcomes. So I kind of wanted to get your view on that.
Absolutely, we see it right at the heart. We've got, I didn't show this picture because it was kind of meaningless, but we've got another docking station which is outside a health centre. It wouldn't have been, but anyway, for GPs to, as everybody's saying, it's about breaking down barriers, and obviously using an electric bike chassis system. People stumble at the beginning, don't they? And they think no idea how to use this, don't know, But actually, once they appreciate how to use it, if my director was here, he would use himself as a prime example. He bought himself to an electric bike. I'm sure he won't mind me saying, but he's got a heart condition. He's never felt healthier because he now, or pre-COVID, but he commutes. So I think it's just, we've got to get a groundswell going. We've got to get that word of mouth that in each surgery, a couple of people get prescribed access to the scheme instead of maybe access to a gym, or this is just a gym can be very intimidating for a lot of people. But actually, if you need to get some exercise, use the bike. It's right outside the surgery, and off you go. And I think that once that starts to happen, I think it's limitless what we can achieve.
That's amazing. Thank you. I'm going to ask if our other panelists can appear magically in front of me, just like that. Isn't that brilliant? The question that I think has been really running around my head since we started speaking about this session internally is, how do you balance? Sorry, just to say for viewers at home, we have lost Waffiyyah, unfortunately. We managed to suck all of our wisdom and then her internet fell over. So if there are specific questions for Waffiyyah that you'd like to put to her, then her contact details were in the recording, or I'm sure you could ask the friendly CoMo team and they could put you in touch. To go back to our lovely panelists still in the room, the question I had was around the need for intersectional accessibility. So in the sense of a solution that might work for a group of people might not work for another. How do we find that balance? How do we make sure that we're hearing all the voices we need to hear before we start construction, whatever it is, whether it's infrastructure or a service or an app or whatever it might be? How do we make sure that we're getting that right balance across all these different groups who may have, protected needs for whatever reason? Debs, you're nodding, so I'm going to go to you first.
Thanks, Rachel. I think it comes back to this idea of community voices and having the right people in the room. So the poll that was around my presentation was about who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in this conversation, and communities were at the center of that. So I think, but communities don't know what they don't know. So communities know what everything about their space, their place, but do they know what options are available to them? So I think there's something there about identification of the community anchors, the key stakeholders within communities, the movers and shakers who can get to the less, I don't want to use the term lesser heard voices, but the ones who don't come out, and really exploring with them what their options are so that they can give us an indication of what's best for them.
Brilliant, thank you. What a great answer. Kevin, you unmuted, jump in.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and that's just to add to it from a more of a bus industry perspective. I think what we see sometimes is the community shouting for a bus route, for example, and it may only be a few people who are the loudest voices, like Debs is saying, and not actually using the data, I suppose, to make a decent decision on if it's actually viable or should it, can it be put elsewhere and to better use. So we like to say, yes, consult with the community, but also try and make sure it's a large enough sample, make sure there's actual statistical data point that you can take from that. And then I guess once we're going into rollouts and things of what we do, the demand responsive, we're actually just using the data. So the data is telling us where the vehicles go, how many vehicles should be here. So you start to use that as your decision point once it launches. My 2 pennies.
Thank you. Janet?
I would just throw in as well that the channels that we use to communicate with people, I think we need to be innovative about that. So I completely agree with Debs about absolutely the community voices are the bedrock of anything that we do. But as we're all understanding, some people shout louder than others. So it's about, I think, so we did a consultation on Sunday at a Christmas fair on a street in one of the neighbourhoods. So it's absolutely nothing to do with cycling. We were just randomly there. And my feeling was that more locals came out that wouldn't, if we'd have set up in the village hall, in the community centre on a Thursday night and said, come and talk to us about bike share. Honestly, I reckon I'd been there on my own, but we spoke to over 130 people in a couple of hours on a Sunday morning who were meandering around a Christmas fair, and we were very low key. You know, it's just, obviously seeing anybody with a clipboard is never a great thing, but you know, we've just like hand scratched out a map, where is it, you know, just made it really, really soft. And we got, I felt we got a great interaction from people that we wouldn't normally have been able to reach. So
brilliant, thank you. Sam, are you wanting to jump in? Absolutely no
Yeah,
pressure.
I mean, again, it's much the same. Obviously, I feel it's quite clear that throughout all the presentations there, it was a strong sense of community was becoming the theme. But I also massively agree with the concept that people don't know what they don't know, and everybody else on this call more than myself, you know, with the experts, and it's about kind of taking the innovation upon ourselves, because a lot of the time people don't know what they need, and I think, like Kevin was saying, if you've got the data to support that, maybe this isn't kicking up a lot of a noise, but we can see that we're getting requests rather silently from this area for another bus route or similar to any of the other businesses involved, taking the initiative to go and propose that as an option, because even in some communities you might have none of those people that go out of their way to really shout about what they want. And I think it's our kind of responsibility to make sure people know what's on offer and know what they can expect.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. So I guess the poll was running, the second poll on, do you think that shared should be particularly subsidised to operate in lower income areas? Whilst we were doing questions with Kevin, I guess I would be really interested to know what you all think to that question, and I guess why. We have 3 minutes left, so if you look at this tech, isn't that brilliant? So if you could do me 30 seconds on what you think and why. It's pretty clear what the majority of people at home think. I guess that you'd agree with them, but if
yeah, I mean, I'll jump in first with a big fat yes. I agree with the majority here. I think it's the majority view. I think that every kind of business needs to be finding ways in which they can limit carbon footprint more than anything else, and kind of, as well as the points we've already made about kind of some of the other businesses I've seen over the last couple of days in terms of ride sharing or bringing people sort of more together in terms of transport. It's all a positive, and there are going to be areas that are more difficult to implement this in, whether it's about lower income or it's about resources on our end, and there should be some sort of help to it to kind of encourage those schemes, because overall they are a huge benefit to any community that they're implemented into.
Thank you, Sam. Debs, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, and I would agree with all the above, and I'm really pleased to see actually that the majority is in agreement with the subsidised. I think it's really important that we give whatever support and make available whatever support is necessary to allow parity of transport, that people can access things in the way that suits them at a time that suits them, in the same way that other people can. So I think it's just about how we find a way to make that parity a reality.
Thank you. And Kevin?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say access to transport options is a fundamental right that we should all have. I saw a really good quote the other day around how to view the public transport subsidies. When we think about the investment that the government puts into, I guess, army and R&D, we don't treat it like a loss. We don't look at it as something that is, we should, treat the way we do public transport, I guess, where you look at it as uneconomical in certain ways. So I think there's a bit of a mind shift that could help this conversation if we treated public transport as a fundamental service, and then we would actually start funding it probably more, I would say, to developing it into more optimized service. So a few thoughts around that, yeah.
Thank you, Kevin. Janet, 30 seconds left. Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think this is just all about raising aspirations as well, and everybody should have the opportunity to do that, whether you're a young person wanting to go to access better education, and you can do that in, we can provide that support to do that, or you socially isolated because you haven't got the funds to go to wherever it is that wherever it is you'd want to go to. A fundamental right that we should be supporting. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Folks, thank you so very much. For the audience at home, thank you for your questions. For our panelists, thank you for your insight and your expertise. It's been enormously helpful. Next up, we have our final session, the hub of the matter, chaired by our CEO, Richard. So I'll see you over in the booths for the next 15 minutes. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.